Yeah, cool, great. I'll just get the PowerPoint presentation up. Okay, everybody, so we're back. We are live recording, so just like to welcome the team, the LTP team. Yeah, first of our workshops for today. Great, thank you. So I think you've got the PowerPoint in front of you anyway. So really 3 things today. Most of the time we want to just have a bit more of a chat about the strategic framework. So we've taken the feedback that we got from you in a previous session, and we just want to kind of refine that a little bit further before we kind of nail exactly what that strategic framework looks like. So we'll spend most of our time on that. We've also brought to you the significant forecasting assumptions. This is what we have to do for our LTP. They're the kind of key assumptions that drive everything that we do in our LTP and all our planning for it. And we've also brought back to you the outcomes of our 28th of February workshop, and we're keen just to make sure that we've got that right and accurately kind of reflected everything that you told us at that workshop. So if we start on the strategic framework, here we go. We go. So remember why we have this. It's a key component of our long-term plan, and it really kind of sets the scene for what our priorities are in our long-term plan and what we're going to kind of focus on in our expectations. So at our last workshop, we talked about some key changes that we wanted to make to that strategic framework. You go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I've got it in front of me. Right, stop asking people to do things for me and do it myself. There we go. Okay, right, so the key changes, so remember all the stuff at the top, kind of what we want for the future of Waipa, are the things that really kind of set that long-term direction, so 10 years kind of plus. And they start with your vision that you've had in place for a wee while, and also your 4 community outcomes that generally kind of cover across your 4 kind of well-beings that you're required to under the Local Government Act. And you've got some good explanation around what those outcomes mean. So you're kind of making it quite kind of unique and relevant to Waipa. And then one of the key changes that we made, that we talked about at the last session, was around bringing the Ahuaki Community Spatial Plan as a key document that's going to really start to deliver on those outcomes for Waipa. So we've included that in red there. There's lots of small writing in there, and the reason why I did that is it's actually quite helpful to kind of have that line of sight and just to kind of understand how things kind of flow through in your strategic framework. So when we talk about cultural champions, what are we actually kind of focusing on there and what do we mean? And then you can actually drill down quite nicely into the Ahuaki spatial plan to kind of go, okay, well, how are we going to deliver on that through our spatial plan? And then your next step down is looking at your external strategic priorities, which are, okay, well, what are our areas of focus in the first 3 years of our LTP? So it actually provides quite a nice line of sight. Don't worry, you won't have all that small writing in the final strategic framework, but it just kind of helps with our thinking as we kind of go through this process. So under the Ahuaki Community Spatial Plan, we've got just an explanation of the bottom lines in there. So those kind of things that are just fundamental and important to everything that we do as we deliver Ahuaki across our district. So that's all that's kind of representing. And then the stuff in the orange and the next kind of layer down is our external strategic priorities. So what we did at that workshop was we took what you had for the previous, well, our current LTP, our 21 to 31 LTP, and we kind of went, is that still kind of relevant? The strategic priority itself, and then the kind of description underneath it. And that's what we talked about last time. So what you'll see in red there is where we've made some changes. So one of the things that we talked about last time was amending the climate change strategic priority so that it's focusing on our climate change response rather than preparing for it. So I guess it's kind of more action kind of focused. What are we actually doing now, because it's real now? And then what we also did was add a new external strategic priority around the environment. And that was quite a clear focus that from you guys last time was, hey, look, the environment's really important to us. we've got it as one of our community outcomes, but we think it's something that we should be kind of also kind of stressing as a strategic priority for the next 3 years. Sorry, Claire, I'll just finish this intro and then I'll come back to you. So that's what we've kind of included in there. And then we've removed the strategic priority around leading the recovery of Waipa. So there were a couple of reasons for that. One is that initially was more of a direct response to COVID, which we know still exists. But we also, I think a lot of you stressed last time that it's actually about building resilience across everything. So it's not just about COVID. It's also kind of recognizing that there's lots of these kind of things happening to us at the moment in this perfect storm that we're in. And it's very much around building resilience of our people, our communities, and our infrastructure. So we've tried to kind of reflect that across those external strategic priorities, but we want to have that chat to you a little bit more. So those are the kind of key changes that we've made. And there's some areas that once we talk this through with the executive team that we just kind of wanted to drill down a little bit and refine, just so that we're really clear about what it is that you're wanting to see. So that's how we want to spend the next few minutes, is just kind of going through that. So Claire, happy to come to you.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to comment about that red box about caring for our environment, because underneath it you've got protect green space. Well, that's only a subset of the environment.
So yeah, that is a very, very good point, and that was one of our discussions that we wanted to make. So that's kind of what we captured on the board, but I think we need to kind of refine exactly what that strategic priority looks like for you. So
yes, because I'd like to see water, like blue space, but also, yeah, biodiversity generally. Yeah.
So that's a good little segue into our first discussion.
Oh yeah.
I just wanted to check.
Push your button.
Oh, sorry. I had the red button, yes. So I just wanted to check first that everyone's happy with roughly where that's kind of landed, that we haven't kind of come up with anything that you're kind of gone, well, where did that come from? Roger.
Thank you. Yeah. There was a question that was raised later on in this paper that questioned whether resilience was the right word to use. And so that prompted me to just have a look and get the definition of resilience, and is there a better way of putting it? And to me, resilience is actually reactive. There has to have been something that's gone wrong for us to be responding to a negative event. Is there another word that we can use that actually is a positive word that says we, maybe it's part of well-being, you know, that we focus on well-being so that our communities are well prepared for handling such events. So it's a kind of a positive spin rather than, so it's proactive rather than reactive, which is what that word sustainable.
So very good point. And have you been reading, was it the McKinsey report? Because that talked quite a bit about that, and that resilience is more about the event itself, and it should actually be more about the kind of things that you're doing in quite a proactive way to recover from that. Yep. And things like innovation and thriving and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't matter if we don't come up with the words today, because my mind's kind of ticking over already, but if we can ensure that we're clear on what your intent is, and then we can kind of do some work on that. So, but again, we're kind of jumping ahead to the discussion points. So
it's just that we use the word resilient quite a lot in here.
Yeah, and those are the things that we want to refine. Yeah.
And just the only other thing that and I know we've actually discussed this before, and it's the Blue Box, Cultural Champions Promote Culture and Heritage. And Mana Whenua is specifically identified. Is there a way in which we can put on that the culture of all peoples within our community are respected and valued? So I don't want it to be seen just as a Mana Whenua focus, because it's important that we respect all cultures. And of course, as we're growing, you know, the different communities that are coming in.
So you've got in there, you talk about tangata whenua partnerships, which obviously is very important, but you also talk about respecting cultural diversity. So is that something that kind of captures?
I think it does.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
I guess there's 3 separate lines. That's how I read it. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So I think we'll just go on to the discussion points, and thankfully you've already kind of honed in on some of the things that we would like to hone in on. So, oops, I'm in charge of the PowerPoint. That's just going through the changes that we made. Okay, so when we talk about environment, we're really keen to just understand a little bit more around what the intention of this strategic priority is in terms of what it needs to cover. So, good point, Claire, and that we captured kind of what we had up on the whiteboard from that discussion. It was mainly around green space and I think what was productive land. So if we could just flesh that out a little bit more, like when you think about an environment as a key external strategic priority, our external strategic priorities are the things that are really going to kind of focus our work program for the first 3 years of the LTP. So what does that look like to you? What are some of the projects and things, not projects, sorry, but what are some of the things that you would like to see kind of happen in that space? And then we can kind of match projects to that. So,
well, firstly, do we have to define it by projects? You know, like, because what struck me is that, you know, we've got, I think it's a national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity or something that's coming out, which is pretty important. And that covers the whole spectrum of the natural environment. And in a way, it's not just, I think, about projects, but also the policies that the council sort of sets up and as a way of a framework for everyone that lives here. Yeah. But I was thinking, well, if it's green space, it won't include the peat lakes. It won't include improving the Waipa and the Waikato River and things like that. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's why, you know, I raised it, because I thought, it's too narrow, really. And then we've got key threatened species here in the Waipa, and I don't want to lose them. You know, I'd be gutted if in my watch, you know, we lost 2 or 3 more species or something. So I'd really like to see a framework, a policy, you know, something like that, not necessarily a particular project.
Yeah. So part of it's around creating our kind of decision-making framework, the things that kind of drive our decisions, and partly that's captured in Ahuaki as well in terms of the environmental focus.
Yeah, like I was really pleased with the early work that was done for environmental benefit lots, because I can see that that's really making a big difference to landowners, you know, who are wanting to do like restoration planting to protect waterways, and also restoring wetlands, you know. But we've already had a workshop that we think that those benefits won't be delivered anymore. Well, they're under threat, possibly because of the national policy statement on highly productive land. So maybe we need to do a bit of work on that to ensure that we do have really good incentives in place, so that, you know, the private sector can be doing this work, but, you know, it's under the umbrella of being enabled by council.
Cool. So from what I've heard from that, it's definitely not just about green space. It's about more of a comprehensive look at caring for and valuing our environment, and doing that in a way that we're kind of reflecting, I guess, what's happening at a national level in terms of all the national policy statements that are coming through in that regard, reflecting that in our kind of policy planning, decision-making framework. And then that in itself will kind of drive a lot of our project delivery stuff as well.
I'll just speak quickly. I also think you want to look at a regional level, because you know, a regional government actually sets a lot of the environment policies that we operate under. So we would have to take regard to anything that comes through from them. So things like SNAs and all these things, and all our lakes, peat lakes, etc., are actually controlled by the regional council. So we would have to take regard to that.
Cool.
Sorry, that anything that we do for the environment supports our response to climate change. Yeah, so I know that they're side by side in the chart that you've got there, but it doesn't really sort of convey how closely intertwined they are. that anything we do for the environment is actually going to be good for it. Yeah, protecting us from extremes of climate change.
And I think, I know like the planner in me likes these kind of perfect boxes that we kind of put things in and stuff, and that nice kind of flow down, but there's always going to be that kind of interrelationship across things. So yeah. Any other comments on the environment strategic priority? Kind of happy with where that's sitting? Happy that that's a new strategic priority that you've created for this LTP?
I'm seeing lots of noddings. That's a good sign.
Sure. I was a tiny bit torn on this one, and not because I'm not into protecting the environment. I totally agree with it being a community outcome, but just as a key external strategic priority for a 3-year timeframe, it sits there beside climate change, which I think the response to climate change does definitely deserve to be in there. The timing's totally right, and the environment one, I looked at it. I went, it's sort of almost a bit of a hold all, and I couldn't quite see what it was going to drive, but then overall, I'm happy for it to be there. But the sort of the narrative, the words underneath it aren't right yet. But if we start going really wide and talking about fresh water and biodiversity and protecting, green spaces, etc., it just becomes so huge. It almost becomes a meaningless strategic priority. So you're going to have a little bit of a challenge there for me to get that as a targeted, decent 3-year strategic priority.
Yeah, I think your target. I get what you're saying, but I think your kind of targeted approach is, well, what are we actually going to do to deliver on that over the next 3 years? And it's certainly, just because it's a 3-year priority doesn't mean that you have to do absolutely everything to kind of solve that and tick that box. You know, that's just completely unrealistic. So it's just kind of thinking, what are some of our priorities in that space that we're going to kind of focus on in the next 3 years? And then in 3 years' time, you might look at that strategic priority again and go, well, actually, we've got some different priorities now because we've achieved some things or stuff's changed or whatever. I mean, you look at what's happened in the past 3 years and how much has changed in terms of focus and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's not being overwhelmed by what's in there, and just kind of what it does do is really help tell your story about kind of what's important to you and what you're going to focus on. Okay, sounds good. Sorry. Great, cool. So we're happy with that. We're going to move on to the next discussion. So this was around climate change. So again, one of the kind of discussions that we had with the executive team was, are you happy with an external strategic priority that's just focused on climate change, or is it all about building resilience for all situations, including climate change? So that was, should we just have a broader response there, or should we kind of hone in on climate change?
Okay, comments. Claire and then Lou.
Yeah, well, actually, I was wondering if this is a good time to have a broader discussion about resilience, because I thought what Roger brought up was a really good comment. And I'd really like to talk through or tease out, what are we talking about when we use that word, and is it the word we want to use? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't actually agree that it's only responsive. I actually think it's more to do with what's an innate characteristic of our community. Yeah, so it's available at all times, not just when we have a big external disaster. You actually use those characteristics at all different times.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
So perhaps if we define resilience a little bit more in terms of what the intent was for that, and then we'll work out where it should sit in this framework. Yeah.
Any other comments on resilience? We'll just keep to that theme. Yeah. That's probably helpful.
I've got actually that circled again, and my understanding in climate change is that we actually want to create change in behaviour generally. And therefore, it is more about mitigation and adaptation. And how do we create those changes in our community that actually address the climate change factor.
Thanks, Roger. Lou.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, I totally agree, and I don't like the word resilience. I think that resilience means the event has occurred and that we are actually reacting. I think we need to look at things that we're doing right now, like the cycleways, okay, the Kiki, the things that we're having in Cambridge. This to me is mitigation. that we're moving forward and creating environments that can allow us to actually utilise events such as cycling, walking, that are going to help with our climate emissions. And I think that's a far more important thing to be looking at than us trying to react to something that is happening in the community somewhere else, and we're just reacting to it.
Okay, so we've got two schools of thought at the moment. We've got a Roger and Lou kind of theme coming through, which is different to Claire's and Andrew's, I'm guessing. But I'm going to take Mike and then I'll come back to you, Andrew. So
yeah, can I just take up this resilience point first? Resilience is particularly appropriate when you're talking about infrastructure, I think, because you're responding to climate change. So the infrastructure that has been built over the past 100 years, some of it isn't going to be resilient in the face of the kind of climate change effects we're going to experience. So resilience particularly works well for me in infrastructure. Maybe it's more open for debate in terms of talking about resilient society, communities. And just on this, the second point about mitigation and adaptation, they are two totally different things. And I think even this bit of debate here shows how important it is that we set up a climate change part of this organisation, that we have a climate change committee of some sort at the governance level so this goes the whole way down through the organisation. But mitigation primarily is about reducing this organisation's carbon emissions. Okay, there aren't totally enormous opportunities to do it within the organisation, but there are in terms of things like mode shift for transport. Okay, so that's where we can influence mitigation. Adaptation is all about how you're going to adapt to the effects of climate change that are coming our way, regardless of what mitigation we do or do not do. And so a hell of a lot of that is around the infrastructure, and the floods that we've all just witnessed a perfect example of what's coming our way. So they're the two separate branches. And the question of is this more about mitigation or is this more about adaptation? I think it's pretty clear in all levels of government that it has to be both. It's not even a debate really worth getting into. We're doing both, or we need to do both. And we need real clarity about how we're going to do that. And so that's why I fully support this being its own strategic priority here. And the actions that flow from this, they're going to be really important over the next several years, starting now, and starting some sort of governance layer would be great. And I'd like to actually put that in as an action potentially under the strategic priority.
Sorry, just to be clear, so you fully support still having that strategic priority around responding to climate change, but talking about mitigation and adaptation underneath it.
Yep. No, the one I was saying, gearing this organisation up to handle it well. This goes back to the internal audit report about us developing in our climate change governance. I'd like to see in the next 3 years that we advance that well beyond developing from a governance point of view.
We'll go to Andrew.
Liz, so I agree with virtually all you said there. But I want to come back to resilience. I love that word. It's a great word and a great thing to be. And I don't see it being reactive necessarily at all. You have resilience on a personal level, community level, and a physical level, infrastructure and et cetera. And on all of those levels, it's largely about attitude as well. When something happens unexpectedly to you, how do you react? And it's a personal choice, and we can make it a organisational choice as well. So please don't get rid of resilience. It's a great word.
Okay. Anyone else want to have a turn? Otherwise, I'll throw it back to Claire. Philip.
Well, yeah, thank you. Just briefly, whatever we decide on or agree on and the direction we take, it's all going to be sustainable. So sustainable is maybe a word to use alongside with resilience as well.
Any other comments, Claire?
Well, I was going to respond to what Andrew was saying, I guess. about what makes something resilient. And I agreed with his, it's your attitude or the way you cope with some sort of impact. And just observing what happened with Cyclone Gabrielle, I think it's those really good connections that people have, either at a community level or at wider networks and things like that. Like in my studies on climate change, they signalled that it would be open knowledge networks that would be the key way that people would cope with climate change. And that's what we're talking about, good networks at a community level, at a council level with other councils, which is what we're doing with the Adopting Council and things like that, and then with the government and things like that. And getting expert advice. I totally agree with Monty about advancing our skills, where we're at, to see us more than being developing. I'd love to have a goal in there that, responding to climate change, we're going to build our skills so that we're competent or mature or whatever. Because I think it's incredibly important, and it's not just important for the council, it's important for our community too.
Okay, Cheryl, have you got something, have you got a good sense of direction?
I think so. I think we're going to have to play around a little bit more with the words though, but I think I've got a good sense of the intent. So what I'm taking from this is that we're going to keep those 2 red boxes as they are, responding to climate change and caring for and valuing our environment. We talked about the environment and that being a much broader scope across what it covers, as well as the policy kind of planning framework right through to project delivery. With responding to climate change, I think is a middle ground that we talk about resilience, but we also talk about the more proactive kind of positive side of things as well. And we kind of counteract that. So that's a nice little sitting on the fence kind of middle ground that we could kind of have a play around with some words to achieve that. Does that sound okay? And what we'll do is we'll flesh out the black and the red words under there. And your current LTP, you've got a really nice kind of 3 or 4 bullet point description of each of those external strategic priorities. So we'll come up with some words underneath those and we'll bring that back to you. Make sure that you're happy with it before we kind of take it to a formal kind of council committee for adoption, because it's pretty important. And as I said, from that, then you'll kind of flow and go, well, here's our kind of top 3 priorities that we want to happen in the next 3 years to deliver on this strategic priority. So I think it's worth us taking the time just to get it right. But I think I've got a good sense of where you want that to head. So
yeah. Thanks. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, you're getting used to me asking questions. Under that box about caring for the environment, you've got about productive land. Now, there was some really good stuff that came through about Ahuaki consultation, and it was about the fact that people on the land realising that, you've got these, the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Soils, but they also know with climate change that perhaps the things they've been doing with their land, aren't actually going to be possible in the future. And there was some ideas that came through there about sort of having some kind of rural economy sort of strategy or something. Yeah, expecting change. And I just wanted to say that I thought that was a really good idea. And it can be either under the climate change with, resilient communities thinking about our rural sector, or it could be about the way we make sure that the productive land that we've got is actually used in the best way. So, it's in there, but from what we've discussed already, I didn't know whether or not it would get much priority in the next 3 years, but I thought it was something great to actually get something kicked off in the next 3 years. Don't know what other people think.
Any comments on that? General agreement, perhaps. Let's see. Yeah.
So we'll just bring that next version back to you and see how we go with that. And hopefully each time we're just refining it a little bit more and we'll get it to where it needs to get to. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's great. I mean, some of these concepts are a bit kind of hard to grasp, but I think that's been really, really helpful. So one of the things that we didn't really kind of talk about last time was around our 4 community outcomes. So we kind of last time assumed that they're kind of pretty fit for purpose. But again, when we talked to executive team about this, there was a bit of a discussion around the socially resilient outcome and whether or not resilient was the right word there as well, or whether or not that would be better to be reflected as social wellbeing, particularly with the description that kind of sits underneath it. So keen for any kind of feedback on that. So would we keep that outcome as socially resilient, or would we change it to social wellbeing?
And I'm not going to repeat it again, but the comments that I made previously, I think, are also relevant when we're talking about this, that as an overall, then we're looking to proactively create wellness within our community. And wellness means there's all aspects of wellness, which I think is far more encompassing than just socially resilient.
So you're supportive of that changing to wellbeing? Yeah.
Is everyone genuinely happy with the idea of changing that? Anyone with opposing views? Great. Let's there we go. Shortcut.
Moving on.
Much as I love the word resilient, in this situation, I'm not even sure what socially resilient is, but social well-being is clearer to me.
Okay, that's great. Executive team will be happy with that. Right, okay. So now we're just going to, as I said, we'll just continue to refine that, and we'll probably bring it back to another workshop before we go to the Planning Policy Committee for adoption. And then that gets included in your LTP as a final document. And it helps tell that story of your long-term plan as well in your consultation document. So the next key thing, and we kind of touched on this last time, we didn't bring you the significant assumptions. We said we were doing work on them, but it's just kind of recognising that these are the things that kind of underpin all our planning and our thinking in terms of what we include in the LTP. It's also a requirement of Local Government Act, and they're really kind of your key significant assumptions. So there's often a lot of assumptions that sit in your financial strategy and your activity management plans and things like this, but these are these kind of big ones. Typically they're quite similar across most councils, but yeah, they are pretty important. So what we've done is a bit of a review of those to make sure that they're fit for purpose for this LTP. And we've kind of gone through, we've created some new assumptions. We've amended most of the assumptions just to make sure that they're kind of up to date and reflect where we're at the moment, or where we need to be over the next 10 years, and also deleted some. So I was just going to highlight some of the key changes, and then happy to have if there were any clarification about what we've got in there, happy to kind of have a bit of a chat about that. And eventually these will come to you for adoption as well. So just to kind of go through some of the key changes. So obviously, we've included an assumption around the Three Waters reform. That probably won't be included in the final LTP because things presumably would have kicked in by then, but they kind of help to drive our planning process and give clarity about what our approach is as we're moving into developing our LTP. And then we've removed some assumptions where they kind of touch on Three Waters plan.
Yeah, well, I understand that stormwater is going to stay generally with us. So, that is one of the waters.
So we've put the exception around rural drainage in there. Does that cover?
No. That's right. We can get clarification from the staff around.
I mean, at the moment,
whatever the plan is.
The moment, you mean like some of the stormwater reserves will stay in council ownership and be managed?
Yeah, but we don't know for sure, but I actually think it will, because I mean, the commentary was it's so complex, they're going to have a close look at it. Well, it's so complex, it would be crazy to move it, I think. But yeah, I mean, I was having a chat to Gary about something else, and he said we have to be guided by the legislation. So if the legislation says we're not allowed to include it, we can't. Yeah, but it seems a bit, I mean, it's going to stay.
Kirsty.
So through the chair, I was just going to add that point that there is legislation that has been enacted that we're required to comply with, and so that is guiding what we're doing, and we're also working in with other councils through Taituara. There have been sessions that have been held. So look, if the situation changes, then we will obviously respond to that accordingly. But at the moment, we're acting in accordance with what the legislation is requiring us to do. Thank you.
Are we under risk of maybe blindly following that, legislative direction, but when we can see this change is coming, like is staff going to have to scramble to get all the numbers together and things like that? Like, are we going to be in a really unenviable situation trying to get, the next LTP finalised because of this uncertainty?
I think we're not alone, and that's the key. And I think the reality is that there is a lot of uncertainty for this LTP for everyone. So all we can do, as Kirsty said, is kind of base our assumptions on what we know here and now, what in terms of what will happen. And if things change, we just need to be agile and kind of have to move with that as we can.
I think one thing that's out of the significant assumptions is to recognise the fact that we're going to be financially constrained, quite significantly so. So all of our aspirations have to take that into consideration, because we're living in an environment where we're having quite record levels of inflation. We're seeing massive changes within our infrastructure and society. And I do think quite really realistically, everything that we plan has to be overridden by that factor.
Well, your financial strategy is key and your LTP and your financial measures, but obviously things are changing so much, we won't have the kind of detail around exactly what the implication is until a little bit later on when all that information gets released. But I'll just hand over to Dawn just to talk about the 3 words.
Thank you. Just morena, everyone. Just with respect to the stormwater query, you'll recall leading up to 2021 long-term plan, a lot of work was done on the waters master planning out to sort of 2050, including stormwater. And at the early stages of the long-term plan, we were looking at what does the program look like over that time, particularly in response to our global discharge consent. So that's now been launched. And in 2021, we made the decision that we'd wait until we had that consent to fully understand the implications in terms of investment required. So we've got a lot of information to help inform. So it wouldn't be a scramble as such, it would just be an uplifting of that program. But equally, we've still got to wait for that consent. Whilst it's been lodged, it's on hold with Regional Council at the moment. So as I say, I think everybody's in the same situation, but we are actually quite well placed in there to have a program of work that we could incorporate quite efficiently.
Cool. Okay, so the other thing that we've done is align our significant assumptions to our top organisational risks. So there's obviously a lot of crossover between those. So we've recognised the crossover in this set of assumptions, which is great because it means you're telling a consistent story. You're not saying one thing over here and something different over here. And we've reflected there as well what you've already talked about in terms of your risk appetite of each of those risks with the relevant assumptions. So I think that's a really good point to get to as an organisation, that those things are kind of coming together quite nicely. We've added in new assumptions around tangata whenua partnerships and also technology, just kind of recognising the impact that has on the way we do our business. And the previous, or your current assumptions, there was one that kind of captured all the reforms because of where they were at the moment, but now they're becoming quite distinct kind of things and they're each having their kind of separate implications. So we've split those out. And as I said before, the financial information, while it would be great to kind of tell you this is kind of how things are tracking, that will come later. But I also think it's worthwhile bringing Brad back and just kind of having those regular check-ins as we move through the process, so we can try and kind of keep pace with kind of what is going on and trying to look forward as much as we can. So that's kind of the plan. Yeah, so happy to kind of take any discussion, questions, clarification on those assumptions.
Clear.
It's not necessarily the changes, but it was something that in the list in the table of an existing assumption. Is this the right time to raise that? Yeah. So number 8 is local government shared services, and there's some commentary in the next line that says benefits of shared services will often present as either reduced shared costs for expert advice or an improvement in the effectiveness of the project output, not usually a financial measure. So I was really worried that we won't get any firm measurable KPIs out of the use of shared services, because I do see CoLab as a really key strategic, I don't know, asset, or a really good thing for us to be working on and demonstrating the value that we're delivering to our ratepayers through it. And I'd really love to see some really good measures to show what we're achieving through that. And yes, it may not be sort of dollars saved, but there are other KPI measures, you know, like ease of completion of the work, you know, like the reduced staff hours that are needed to process things, or how much easier it is for the members of the public to use those online services and things like that are likely to be delivered with CoLab. So I'd really love to get some work done on getting some relevant measures that can demonstrate the value we're getting from CoLab.
I'll just talk about the assumption side of things, and then I'll let Ken talk about the second part of that. So I think what this assumption is trying to say is both of those things clear, and that it's around kind of non-financial benefits, but also that there's the potential for cost savings. So I think that it's a little bit weird. I could play around a little bit with those wordings. That's trying to reflect that. That's why it has that in brackets. And the second part of your question, I'll hand over to Ken.
All right, so you have an annual opportunity to, and that annual opportunity is later this month at F&C, when you'll see the draft SOI of CoLab, and Calvin French, the CE, will be here to present that. So have a look at what performance measures they've stated in their draft SOI, and like I say, he'll be here, so you can bounce some thinking off him, and then of course we've got the formal opportunity to write to CoLab with suggestions before they finalise their SOI. So that's the opportunity, and like I say, that will be in 2 or 3 weeks' time. F&C.
Through you, Madam Chair. I'm just going on to the next one now. 9, external fundraising, and you've got it as level of uncertainty very high. I just, we'd asked, and I'm sure that the information is coming, that we've got quite a number of projects that are outstanding that rely on external fundraising. It's not a good climate out there for fundraising currently. I'd like to know, first of all, how much it is that we've got to look for external funding, but then I really think that rather than very high, it could well be set at extreme, because I still think that even over that next 3 years of the LTP, we're going to be in an environment where it's not easy. And realistically, we need to assess whether we can achieve those projects.
So I'm just thinking, kind of what you've asked for is a bit more information around projects and external funding, and where, so perhaps if we can get a bit of a picture of that, I'm just looking at Kirsty, if we can get a bit of a picture of that, and then we can kind of understand from that what that looks like in terms of that level of uncertainty around it. Yeah. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Kind of keep it as very high. I guess I think extreme will kind of stick out a little bit, like we just need to kind of look across all our assumptions and make sure we're kind of happy with the level that we're kind of assigning it to. But understanding exactly what that level of risk is will be really important. So perhaps if we do that work, and then we can form a picture on that.
The next one I've made a comment on is 10 central government grant and subsidy payments. And I'm particularly thinking about urban mobility here. And we were really fortunate that when that money came through, we had it shovel ready to put it in and to get the optimum response of that available fund. And I'd just like to see us adopting that same strategy in terms of our next 3 years, to have a number of those projects that we already have well defined, that are shovel ready, so that we can respond to availability of funding. And I'm thinking particularly of the Leamington, you know, looking at that, the Leamington cycle path, wherever it goes in Leamington. But if we can get that defined and get all of the consultation through, then we could well be in a good position.
Absolutely. I think we're all working towards that. So certainly I'm getting that sense that that's already in place, actually.
Yeah, I agree, Liz, because in that mitigation column, it's got plan ahead and remain agile to respond to potential future funding opportunities. So I think it's covered well. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, that, yeah, but also I think the major contributor, well, you know, the dollars amount, most of it comes from Waka Kotahi, I understand, like that's the lion's share of our grants. And yeah, we are a bit worried about, yeah, that actually being delivered, I think. Yeah.
We shall see. Mike.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Just jump into page 28, number 18. And the population growth, and we've assessed it as high. But to me, a lot of our debt is based around recovering DCs, etc. And this is just that you'll better answer. How often is it every quarter do we get population updates? That's just a general question. Can someone tell me that through the SPMP?
It's not every quarter.
No, but I'm just wondering, right? So because here it's like we look at it and signal it in future annual plans, etc. But I'm thinking, to me, it's it's a really high risk. We got some data last week that we're a little bit, or week before, whenever it was, that we're a little bit behind. Everyone's talking about a headwind. There's a lot of building companies that can't sell packages and their house and land packages, or even try to get rid of land at the moment. So I'd just like us as an organisation to actually focus more on this. And I think quarterly we need to be right on top of this.
Mike, I'll stop you there because there's actually a really good answer to this.
Yep.
Yeah.
So through the chair, you're aware that we are part of the Future Proof Partnership and that we have adopted the NIDIA projections consistent with our Future Proof partners. As part of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, we're required to prepare a future development strategy. That work is being led by Future Proof with input from YPAR as a Future Proof partner. As part of the development of that future development strategy, there is a work stream looking at population growth. So there has been work undertaken by Michael Cameron of NIDIA. There is also other work underway. Obviously, we've just had a census, and so we've acknowledge that there is a requirement for us to be monitoring and reporting back on population growth. So that reporting has been through this committee. There's also, we're preparing Ahuaki, progressing the development of that plan, and we've been I think consistent in our messaging that it's based on population projections, but as this other work is being undertaken, that will inform and feed into our planning processes. So point noted, and we will certainly provide you with updates as we're able to. I think in terms of the work of Future Proof, it has been reported back to you through the district growth quarterly update on that led by Wayne, but we can also look at whether we're able to provide any more regular.
Can I come in with a question on that same topic?
So I was just going to say, to sum it up, projections have always been a form of frustration around this table. There's no question or doubt around that. And we are, of course, tied into Future Proof and the process that we've all agreed to. And I think it's really important that we remain true to that. I know that there has been a lot of frustration over many, many years. Gosh, when I think back to early days, Claire, Andrew, it's been there for a long, long time. So look, I'll happily answer questions. So Claire and then Roger.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, it's great with what Kirsty said. And with the Future Proof monitoring, be really good to actually have some detail on what they monitor, because one of the bugbears we had early on was that it didn't take into account internal migration, because most of the NIDIA stuff is based on Stats NZ data. Yeah. And actually I recalled that Infometrics, with Brad Olsen, he gives updates which we were getting pretty regularly, but we haven't had one recently, actually, on population growth using the data set of new enrolments in primary healthcare centres. And I was thinking that was a really good way of doing it. But I know my son is still enrolled in his doctors, but he's gone to Australia. So whether or not it takes into account new people coming in, but is it accurate enough with people leaving as well? I don't know. But Brad might be able to help us out with some information on how accurate it might be with the stuff that he does. Yeah, because I'm sure we're still using him. Yeah.
I'm sure there's a margin of error, especially with our younger youth and their transient options. Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And it's really going along the same track. Now we're adopting the spatial plan, and the spatial plan will become our top level strategic document, informing everything underneath that. My understanding on the preferred scenario is that the population projection within that preferred scenario, although it's not been totally confirmed yet, but the indications are that in fact the population projection in that preferred scenario is actually greater than the NIDIA high growth projection.
And it may well be, but we are right off topic now, Roger.
No, but what I'm saying...
I think we need to let Cheryl continue through the process.
Can I just register that what I'm concerned about is we've always been told that when we look at the regional base and future-proof and everything, that NIDIA projection is the one point of truth, because all of the other organizations actually work with that. If our strategic document is going to be out of kilter with that one point of truth, I'm just concerned that we're going to be working at a different level.
I'll let Kirsty respond.
Conversations around Ahuaki are to feed into Ahuaki, and obviously that's going through a development process, but I would just like to reiterate the point made in relation to the development of the future development strategy being prepared by Future Proof. This will go through a public consultation process, most likely by the end of the calendar year, and it will feed into the long-term plans of all of the partner councils, so that we will be adopting consistent information that will feed into our long-term plan processes. So this assumption, as it's been drafted, reflects the work that's being led out of Future Proof and the NIDIA projections. So from a staff perspective, our recommendation is that this appropriately captures the information that we're reliant on and required to give effect to.
Okay, Cheryl, back to you.
Just are there any further discussion on the significant assumptions?
Monty, and then Lou.
I'll go last.
Oh, okay, sure. Lou, you can go first.
I strongly feel that we've got to quantify into this document the fact that we're getting a lot of government legislation that is sitting to one side. I'll look at the Urban Intensification Act. We're looking at a Resource Management Act. We're looking at a Spatial Plan Act that we haven't got. We've got an environment as part of an act sitting unheralded at the moment. An Environment Act was part of the Resource Management Act that we have nothing written. We will have to actually act to those because they are national acts. They'll come as NPS, national policy statements, and we will have to actually quantify those into everything we're doing as a risk factor for everything we do.
Yeah, And that's a really good point. And I think that's why we've split out those reforms, because we know a little bit more about them and we know that they're each going to have their own implications. But we've also got another catch-all for everything else, and that we know that other stuff will kind of happen. So I think yeah, I was going to say, I think, Lou, it's captured in lots of the different items, as Sheila was saying. So if you have a look through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7, it's all intertwined in there. So look, agree with what you're saying. I think we've captured it, unless anyone else has an alternative view. No. Okay.
Yeah, good to go last, because it's general comment. I really liked this assumptions document, and I really liked the fact you'd added the risk appetites. Made a lot of sense to me. And I just got to say, I almost laughed out loud though when I read the first 4, because if your assumptions are your basis for planning, and you know the government's going to take a third of your business out the door and going to change all the primary pieces of legislation you work with, and then, oh, by the way, the whole future of local government's up in the air. I just thought that I almost laughed, going, yeah, this is the basis you're planning on. So it's a tough one. So yeah, look forward to it.
It's an interesting read, doesn't it? Cool.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah. Okay, last but not least, we just wanted to check in. So we had that kind of initial workshop, and it's not saying that everything that we've captured is exactly what's going to be in the LTP. It's just the initial thinking that you had around expectations for the LTP at a high level, in terms of the kind of underlying philosophy, I guess, of kind of what this LTP might look like. And then also at a project and kind of more delivery level, some of the priorities that you identified at the time when we did the post-it note thing on the wall. So what we were keen to do is check in back with you, so we don't just take the information and then kind of go with it. Make sure that we've captured it accurately, and that's just what I'm wanting to know today. But then kind of talk about our plan of attack in terms of where to from here. So in terms of some of the general LTP direction, which is what I've kind of titled under things we can start to use to shape our LTP direction, and things that we need to consider further. So those will start to kind of play out in further workshops that we have. We'll keep coming back to that and go, remember you said this, so what does that kind of look like? So that gives us a bit of a starting line to base those further discussions on. And then there were the key matters and issues that we've captured in the tables. So what we want to do with that is work through with the relevant activity managers and kind of come up with a bit of a plan of attack around how we progress further discussions on those issues. So for some of them, for example, there'll be business cases that are being developed. So we'll be looking at how we kind of bring those back to you. For some of them, they might be more of a level of service discussion. So we'll look at framing up a workshop around our levels of service and things like that. So we just need a bit more time to kind of work through those. But I just wanted to make sure that we've captured everything accurately.
Clear.
Go for it. I think that you've done a really great job of capturing what was discussed. There were a couple of things that have been in the back of my mind that I didn't find it easy to put up on the sticky board thing that we had at the workshop. One thing that I'm really concerned about is the financial sustainability of I suppose, the whole paradigm that councils operate under, that we can fund all the things we need to do for our communities through property taxes. And I do know that overseas there's been some really fascinating work on revenue earners that councils sponsor that really change the way, like you know, they obviously produce income that then reduces the burden of rates. And as far as I'm aware, Waipa doesn't do anything in that space. In fact, a lot of councils around here don't. But there are opportunities, and I'd love to see us explore them, I guess, not necessarily commit to them, but perhaps now is the right time to be looking at it in the next 3 years, whether that was renewable energy that is used to benefit the community where it's produced, composting, whether it's green waste or food as a business. Yeah, and other people might have other ideas, but I think it'd be good to do some research on it and see whether or not it looks viable and whether our community would be keen on it. I do know that in the climate change space, there are some communities that are looking at those very things, like Māori communities, because they see it as a way, I guess, to regain, whether it's, I suppose sovereignty might be a bit stronger word really for that, but yeah, so they can look after their own communities. But yeah, I think it's an opportunity for us really.
So what we'll do today is just capture those things, and then we'll kind of talk about how we might respond to them through the LTP process.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking about your waste management and minimisation plan process as well, that some of that stuff must be getting picked up through.
I just had a couple of things to maybe add to the LTP or the key matters. One is where we had the address Cambridge Library issue, whether that could be library/museum. So I think that there's a school of thought around combining those maybe. And
the word community hub with the library.
Yeah, so, yes. So I'm just
sort of, you're expanding it even bigger.
Yeah, that's right. 3 levels, eh? Yeah.
Library, museum, and kind of community hub.
Yeah, yeah. It could be all. Yeah, I guess I'm just looking to expand it now, just so there's a bit of a sense of that. And the other thing was actually we've talked a lot about destination Karapiro. I'm talking about the school side of the or the, you know, where all the reserves at the moment, whether we should have something like that in there. So we've been talking about upgrading those reserves through while that's Keeley's, Moana-Roa. I don't know, guys. It just felt like it's that destination Karapiro. I wanted to somehow capture that, maybe, just so that it's registered as an opportunity.
Well, I think if we're adding in those reserves, we should carry on up the river to Arapuni as well, because even though you have destination Karapiro, destination Arapuni is not looking so good.
Yep, yeah. Absolutely. And I was really pleased to see the Kiki reserve in here. Marcus, you'll be happy about that. Yep.
Well, just on those reserves though, I mean, I'd love to see a broader view over the whole of the district, so that I'm totally agreeing with, we need these reserves to provide the facilities that our community wants. But I don't want it just to be focused around Karapiro really. I mean, I want to look at like Lake Naroto, you know, in places where we might have reserves, but we don't actually have very many facilities.
Yeah, okay.
You know, that kind of thing.
I would agree with that, especially the ones that connect with water, whether it's the Peat Lake or the Waikato River. I think that's a really good point.
In fact, that could be part of our climate change response strategy, because I think people would love to go to those places if it gets really hot and stuff like that. Yeah,
no, good.
You can't use places like Lake Naroto like you can with Arapuni and Karapiro.
No,
because I can't put my jet skis in there and go for a swim.
Yeah, I realise that, but
you can kayak.
Yeah, but I mean it's a peaceful place and it's shady as well. Yeah, but I know. Could I raise something else too? Like it came up with the Chamber of Commerce, or I suppose Go Waipa. You know, they're talking about an economic strategy for Te Awamutu. So I don't know where that is, because they mentioned the need for. There was this discussion about accommodation, you know, that was holding back the use of the stadium and that. And we talked about it many years ago, actually, I think. But I don't know what happened to it. But I do think, could we just see where that's at and whether or not it would slot into one of those key external priorities that we've got? Yeah,
I know exactly the conversation you refer to. I remember it. We was looking at land just on the side of the event centre as potential opportunity. So yeah, it would be good to revisit that, to circle back to that. Gosh, that was a long time ago, Claire.
Sorry, was that an economic strategy, did you say, or was it?
It was part of an economic strategy for Te Awamutu, but it was sort of looking at the what we called the community hub at the time, which involves the event centre, the redevelopment of the library and possible location of Te Arawai. But of course that's sort of changed a bit. But I think it was signalled at that presentation that nothing's been done about accommodation generally here in Te Awamutu, which is actually holding back some opportunities. Yeah.
And Mike?
Thank you through the chair. Just adding on to Claire's previous statement about extra revenue to reduce rates, but all the examples you gave were around environmental sort of things. But I'd just like to push that wider. And I know up in Northland they do a good example of, they took on, it's called Far North Holdings, for instance. So it's just a business. Might be quite good to talk to Moko about it for on the blower to him, but maybe that's why my rates in Northland are so cheap. But I think we should be looking at not just land acquisition and selling. I totally agree with that, Claire. We should be looking at a business strategy and take it out and see if there is an appetite in the community that we actually get into getting hold of businesses, whatever they are, to reduce rates in the community. And that would be a good strategy to investigate.
Okay, everybody, I think Cheryl, we've landed. Are there any other burning issues? Otherwise, we will wrap it up there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, hey, look, we'll break for morning tea now. So if we can come back at, say, 10:35, we've got our community board ready to roll. We're a little bit ahead of time, if that's all right with everybody. Yeah. who also here, who will come and speak to us shortly as well. So ladies, I'm happy to hand it over to you. Is that okay?
Yes,
yeah,
thank you. Thank you again for having us. Any opportunity we've got to come and speak to you is always really appreciated. So thank you. As you know, we've been working on our strategic priorities that we really want to focus on and advocate for over the last, for the next 3 years. You remember I came and spoke to you about these a few weeks ago, but I just, we want to go into a little bit more detail today. We began by workshopping our priorities that we felt were, Zoe, do you mind doing the next slide? That were specific and achievable and were really aligned with Waipa community outcomes, all with having that overarching guide of community wellbeing at heart. And I just wanted to say that we're really grateful for the help that Kirsty has given us along the way with us. She has given us really good advice and mentorship as always, so thank you very much. We are and really plan to continue to work in partnership with council staff with our priorities and councillors. Now, before I get into our 3 priorities, you'll maybe remember that last time I was here, there were 4 of them, and our last one was a rural priority. We have kind of discussed this, and we really wanted to increase our connection with the rural community and just refresh our rural tour. That is something that's still really important to us as a board and is definitely on our to-do list. It's not so much of a formal strategic process, and we won't be submitting anything about it into the LTP, so we've just left it off for today. So we'll just be focusing on our top 3. Can you do the next slide for me? Thank you. So our first priority and really top of our list is to see a new library and community hub in the next LTP. I emailed you this morning a copy of the recent Taituara Living Libraries report, which is a fascinating report in a study where 84% of the respondents agreed that libraries increased their feelings of happiness and well-being, and 74% agreed that it increased their feelings of belonging to a community. And I don't really need to convince you too much more about how important libraries are. And really the Cambridge Library is one of our most used and loved facilities. And we just see the opportunity for a new library and an associated community hub where other services are linked with a well-functioning library as preferable to our current service. And having a hub that links the library with perhaps the museum or art, places to rest and connect with other people, perhaps to receive health screening. There's just a whole range of possibilities and benefits for the community that exist within that idea of a new library and community hub.
Yeah, we can ask questions as we go along. Is that okay? Yeah, Mike.
Thanks to the chair. Yeah, either Joe or Elise. Just with that goal there, it was just brought up in the last presentation about the possibility of including a museum in there, and just I'm not saying think about it right now, but it is worth considering. You know, library, museum, community hub type thing. That probably be some good.
Yeah, I think we probably, if we finish, we might just finish our library section because it might answer a few of those points, and then do questions after if that works. Just we've got a few more points to make on the libraries. Thanks, Mike. 100%, we know that Waipa District Council really values libraries. We have great libraries in our district, and Joe's backed up. She's got evidence to prove that libraries are good for our community. And we can see the value that Waipa District has for our libraries and our great staff and our great programs that our libraries run, and also some of those progressive movements that Waipa District Council has made around removing borrowing fees just recently. But the thing is, our Cambridge Library is no longer fit for purpose for the needs of our community. It no longer lives up to Waipa's own brand message, the home of champions. And in failing to live up to the world-class amenity standard that I know Waipa strives for, it fails to deliver on the community outcomes for Cambridge that it could. We also know that the Cambridge Library is no longer hitting service delivery targets, and these are directly related to the space that the library operates in. You poke your head into the offices that the librarians work in. It's a confined space with poor, inadequate storage and terrible ergonomic setup for those people. The bookshelves are crammed, as we all know. We've got books on the floor, which is hardly protecting and preserving this precious resource that we have in our libraries, and of course makes the space less safe, harder to clean, and less user-friendly for our community. You know, our librarians, they deliver wonderful programs, but they have to whisper at story time because around the corner are people doing important work, accessing Wi-Fi, accessing the other great opportunities that they have in our libraries. We know that around the world, libraries are leading the way in social equity for their communities, and libraries are indeed more than books. But you walk into Cambridge and all there is room for is books. There isn't room for meeting spaces. There isn't room for breakout spaces. There isn't room for connection across culture. There isn't room for working. And there isn't connection across services like childhood health, like arts, like the museum, like youth. And the story of Mana Whenua simply is not being told in our library. Libraries work with great staff, but libraries are absolute game changers across all community outcomes when they are in buildings designed to meet the dynamic needs of a diverse community. The Cambridge Community Board believes that Cambridge not only needs, but deserves a world-class library and community hub facility to serve the well-being, the learning, the connection, the community well-being, and the entrepreneurial spirit of Cambridge.
So our next steps really in this process, you know, we understand that a feasibility study is planned. It's not quite yet underway. And we'd really like to stay connected to that process and with the community facilities staff and really feed into it where appropriate. We know that business cases are in development from March to May this year. And while we can't really input directly into them, we're just going to make sure that the staff really understand our position and priority. And if there's any way that we can come to you in any other forum, we'll be here talking about the libraries. So that is really our next concrete steps. When we went to go back to the library. When we went to the Ahuaki, engagement roadshows, we heard a lot from the community about libraries, and we heard a lot from the community about the museums, really, to answer Mike's question. And so that's really the basis. This is community driven, we feel. We're really hearing it strongly from our community. So that's why this is our #1 priority and the one that we're probably going to spend the most time on this morning.
And I guess further next steps, which are really important in advance of submitting on the LTP, is for us to gather strong evidence to support what we believe Cambridge needs. We're meeting as a board next week to just workshop and plan exactly how we do that, how we divvy up the workload, because we see that as being a significant workload to gather important information to present to council. But the first things we're going to do is engage with key stakeholders, which we imagine to be people like the library staff, group managers, parents of young children, Mana Whenua, the Historical Society, the Museum Trust, perhaps Plunket, and a cross-section of other library users. And we're going to gather some statistics that prove how well used this resource already is, but also how it is no longer meeting the mark. And hopefully all of that will give us a really robust case to then submit into the LTP, at which point we would have built enough kind of noise about it and the business case process as well, that everyone is already on board with the concept by the time we get to the LTP.
Are there any questions about our library priority?
Claire?
Yeah, not a question, but yeah, I think I'm on the same page as you about libraries. I just wanted to say that when we were visiting Levin recently, they've got a fantastic library community hub there. That, yeah, if you get a chance to see it, it was amazing. Like, we went in there and there were just people everywhere. There was a piano performance going on. There was a cafe. There were people reading books, and there were, museum exhibits as well, like all happening, and just felt like you were part of a really living, connected, happy community. Yeah, and I'm sure there's lots of other. Another great example was the Christchurch one, but I liked the Levin one because it's actually a really simple internal space. That whereas the Christchurch one is quite a complex building in itself. But I'm sure you're going to be getting lots of inspiration, and I just wanted to let you know about that good example. All the best.
Thanks, Claire. Any further questions or comments before we move on to our next slide? Right, thank you. Thanks, Zoe. So urban mobility is our next priority, and we really see this as an essential part of the future of Cambridge as our town kind of grows up and out. We're targeting Shakespeare Street specifically this year as our priority, as we know that really this is community driven as well. We really feel that the community are asking for safety improvements in this area. We're really pleased to hear that there are plans in place for the Shakespeare Cook Street intersection. However, these plans are only interim, so we will be advocating that they're made more permanent, or that permanent improvements will be made soon after. The designs for these plans are not quite yet available, but once they are, we will stay connected to the transportation team and the urban mobility governance group, of which I'm a part, and give our feedback to them. For your reference, these changes are funded through the walking and cycling improvements budget. Once these safety improvements are made, we will kind of shift our target to the next urban mobility hotspot, perhaps Thornton Road High School, whatever the next one will be, and we'll just continue to advocate for great walking and cycling paths through Cambridge that are really safe. Thank you. Right, and our last priority is a vibrant and people-friendly CBD. So we really would like to advocate for Cambridge to really continue to be connected and inspired, more comfortable seating, spaces to rest and play. And we really want to see Cambridge be a welcoming town centre that supports active mobility and prioritises people and really celebrates its culture and history. We also see the town hall as being a really significant asset that will become of higher value to Cambridge as those improvements and upgrades are made.
So as part of thinking about how we make this measurable and smart and how we make concrete change to the CBD, we've reviewed the town concept refresh plan, which is an absolute treasure trove of ideas. And some of them we've already seen are starting to be in action, but there's a number that haven't come to fruition yet. And we think are worth picking up and moving forward. And as I mentioned before, we're going to sit down as a board and really nut out specifics, but we've got a few to share with you today that we think are worth attention and worth thinking through. The number one for us is thinking about how we move traffic through and around our CBD, maybe particularly with some focus around Lake Street and Empire Street. How do we activate those areas for pedestrians while still allowing and encouraging our local businesses to flourish? Also, we see potentially that southeast corner of the village green as a great opportunity to introduce play space, seating, opportunity for connection in the community as well. That was also floated in the town concept refresh plan. The existing amenity in that area is really limited. It's not conducive to gatherings of families or friends, and there's certainly potential here for a real change in that environment. I know when I wander around the CBD with my little toddler, she's now a schoolgirl, but when she was a little toddler, it's a real nightmare getting from one side of the road to the other, getting to that village green. So we need to make our CBD a workable space for people of all ages. And we can see that being as potentially a draw card. Another thing that we know is being floated on the LTP is a destination playground in the CBD. We want to see that brought forward in the LTP, and we think it has really nice synergy with our community hub and library. So we'll be working towards making sure that happens within our CBD as well. And the last thing that we think deserves a bit more attention is the Riverside Park through to the jetty down on the Waikato River. It's located on the banks of the Waikato, and it presents an exciting opportunity to turn our town back towards the awa, which has been such a critical part of Cambridge Town's history and early economic development. It's also a taonga for our community. Currently, it's a reasonably sad little ignored part of Cambridge, but it has amazing proximity to the skate park, to the pools. It's right on the fringes of our CBD, and we're not making the most of it. It lacks good connection, it lacks accessibility, it lacks amenity. And when you look across New Zealand, cities and towns, and of course worldwide, you can see the benefit of investing in amenity and green spaces along waterways. Creates a beautiful moment that promotes well-being and connection for our communities, particularly as we face infill development in our towns, but also an attractive place for visitors. A draw card to come and spend some time there. At the moment, Cambridge has turned her back on the awa, and bringing the awa back into the CBD again will really benefit our town greatly. So those are our key hotspots that we want to pay attention to and make some concrete changes to, hopefully, going forward.
Thank you both. I think that was that's been absolutely brilliant. Brad over there is going to think this is a setup, but I can assure you it actually isn't, because that last item you talked about, just by absolute coincidence, there's a community group who are very, very keen to potentially be looking and even potentially funding that that boat ramp Dominion Ave area. So I'm going to suggest that Brad will bring you into that into a meeting.
Great.
Because it's quite imminent actually. So just great minds think alike, right? And all of the other things, of course, I think are probably well versed amongst many of us anyway. The things they've talked about quite regularly. But I'll open up the floor for questions. So I've got Marcus and then Roger.
Yeah, I agree with the whole river just not being used, because I go up and down it quite a lot, and it'd be actually nice to be able to tie your boat up or whatever and then walk up into town and have coffee and things, because it's just a wasteland down there. The only people that are using it are the fishermen that are getting their trout, but it needs to be used.
Absolutely. And there's some lovely walks the Tree Trusts look after. It's just about connecting that whole riverside, bringing it into the mix.
Roger.
Through you, Madam Chair. There's so much in there that I go tick, 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 which is absolutely fabulous. And certainly on the Lakeside Reserve, I mean, during summer, that should be absolutely chocker. People going to, anyway. I just noticed in the first page that of the 6 priorities that you've established, 3 of them actually relate to advocacy. Totally support that, because I think you are the voice of Cambridge. Had you given any thoughts as to how you're going to develop the connections that you have with the community so that you feed that community concern and voice back through in your advocacy?
Yeah. Absolutely. We're wanting to strengthen our relationships with community groups. And I think our chair actually has done an incredibly strong job of that in the last 6 months, and particularly working with some of our stakeholders like the Chamber of Commerce, just refreshing those relationships, keeping and phone on and quick responses to emails and being really available. So we plan to do that with many more of those community groups. As you know, we've got links to all the community groups through our various board members. We'll keep building on those. As Joe referenced, we're going to build on our rural connection specifically. We're workshopping with our rural board member how we can make that happen more and hear from them. I think our public forum has been really strong in the last 6 months. We've had really great attendance from people bringing really quality submissions. So I think we'll continue to create an environment in our public forum that is welcoming and inclusive and has a strong listening ear. And in that way, hopefully we'll develop relationships that we can build advocacy from.
I think the other way that we did it, obviously the Ahuaki feedback has closed, but there were community board members at all of those events, and we were really talking with people, hearing what they were saying, encouraging them to feed into that spatial plan, and just really being visible and, you know, constantly out and about and talking to people. Yeah. Good. And it all adds up. All those little things add up to great advocacy.
Good. And in your last slide, you particularly identify the Cambridge Town Plan refresh. So thank you for wiping the dust off that and bringing it forward once again, because there were some particularly strong messages that came through in that, and obviously developing a life and a culture within our town centre. There's currently a bit of talk about densification and whether we allow 4 or 5 or 20-story buildings in the CBD. That's an exaggeration, by the way. What are your thoughts on that? Are you getting any feedback from?
What we do hear from the community is people want to retain the character. They want to allow for growth, but they don't want to lose that village feel, and that Cambridge Town Hall concept refresh is an excellent document and has awesome ideas in it, some of which Elise went over. But really our priority is to continue to make it welcoming, keep that heritage village feel, allow for growth, but really keep that special character that brings people to live and visit in Cambridge.
Yeah, we haven't heard a lot around, or I haven't heard a lot from people around CBD intensification. It's people are mostly worried about their suburban infill, I think. So I can't comment on that. It's just not been a conversation that I've heard much of. But I think to Joe's point, if we can protect the way Cambridge feels, doesn't matter too much how it looks, as long as it feels like the place that people, matters how it looks. But if it feels like the place they know and love, then that look can evolve and change. And I guess we would just point that for us, we're going to review these strategic priorities each year. This is a living, breathing kind of space for us. We've tried to be really specific and focused so that we see action, because we want to be a board of action. But we will be keeping our ears open to what the community wants and reviewing that through our term.
Thank you, ladies. I think that was, absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate the effort and the thought that's gone into your presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
All right. Okay, everybody. We're going to invite. We'll just take a quick minute. We're going to invite Ange for the Te Awamutu Community Board to come up, and I'm just going to take a wee 1 hour absence. So Mike is going to jump in to our workshop and continue cheering, and I'll see you all a bit later.
Right, things are going to change around here. That was a joke, come on.
I've got power to mine.
Okay, everyone, we're ready to roll. Ange, welcome. The floor's yours.
Morena koutou, ko Ange Holt Takuingoa. So I'm the chair of the Te Awamutu Community Board, as most of you at the table know. So before I get started, I just wanted to tautoko the Cambridge Library. We've had an awesome response to our Te Awamutu Library, and like the ladies are saying, it's a really important space, not just about the books. And as much as I'm supposed to be advocating and supporting money being spent in Te Awamutu, I certainly would love to see Cambridge get a really good community space and the library upgrade, because we were in a very similar situation not so long ago, and I know how frustrating that is. And I also just wanted to say, you know, we had lots of naysayers saying, oh, people don't read as much, it's all going online, rah-de-rah. But man, if you just go down and look at our library any day of the week, it's always busy with people doing lots of different things in there. So it's a wonderful community space, and I'm really grateful that we actually are lucky enough in Te Awamutu to already have a bigger library. So good luck with that, ladies. I also would like to put in an apology for our Deputy Chair Kane, who is tied up at work. So he's a 40-hour-a-week man, so he was unable to get along today to join me. So the Te Awamutu and Kihikihi Community Board Strategic Plan, if we can just pop on to our next slide. No doubt you've read it all. It's not too heavy on the reading there. So basically our vision, purpose and mission is focused on connection, on encouragement of participation in local democracy and enabling our communities to shape their spaces. For a number of years, we've been pretty much an unseen board, and so we really need to up our game to ensure we're credited for what we do and that we get that community voice back onto the council table, and that we can provide that important feedback. So we'll pop to our first goal. So we're talking about enhancing connection to our communities, and like I've just mentioned, promoting the profile of the community board. We're underway with that. So we've got some vests that have got our new logo that you saw at the very start, which is very similar to our last one. We've basically included and Kihi, but so we're going to have a Te Awamutu Community Board logo here and a Waipa District Council, big community board on the back, so that people notice us when we're out and about. We're getting some flags done that we can use. We will continue with monthly pieces in both newspapers, and we'll look to do a media plan that will include leveraging social media and what other things we can do just to get our profile out there and keep reminding the community that we actually are available to help them with their causes or to support their interests. Getting along to AGMs and community events. So I think someone asked the Cambridge Community Board about, I think it was Roger, about how we plan to get out to things. So attend lots more community events. So for example, the Kihi Community Day. Kane is actually our Kakapuku ward member. He's already making regular phone calls to the hall committee people and just touching base with them. And so far, he's already starting to get some good feedback that they're really grateful for reaching out like that. We're going to redo our groups that we will all be in charge of. So for example, mine's social services. So I will make every endeavour to make sure we maintain those connections and try and put ourselves going to them rather than expecting them to come to us. And the other point too, like what the lady said, making the public forums more accessible and friendly. And we too have had a better response and people coming along and speaking up at the public forums, which is really neat to see. One other little idea that we're going to explore around that is maybe to have a slightly different time and see if that works better. You know, is that 6 o'clock time difficult for people? So we're just going to have a little look into that as well. So in regard to building the relationship with mana whenua, first up, we probably should introduce ourselves to Ngā Iwi Toko o Waipa. We haven't actually ever had the opportunity to do that. So I see that as an important first step, and then get out to some marae and just let them know who we are and that we're available to bring their messages back as well. So goal 2, so our next slide. We've focused on this internal processes part because with the Community Boards 2.0, we felt that it was really, really important to bed this in and bed it well. And, you know, hopefully that we can iron out the wrinkles. Kirsty and I were talking about this the other day. You know, it is a work in progress and we're all learning as we go, but hopefully this term, we can be the guinea pigs and iron out most of the wrinkles that going forward, it'll be a little bit more smooth sailing. So we wanted to focus on that. Continue to build relationships. They're pretty good, but they can always be better. And that includes things like working more closely with our community advisors and working with staff in that earlier space. So what we're getting from community can be fed into the plans that then the wider community can comment on and feedback on, rather than where we are at the moment, where staff mostly do the planning part and then we comment at the other end of it. So we really would like to get at that front end as well. And in there is obviously identifying opportunities for further delegation. So that will be some work we're going to have a look at. Goal 3. Okay, so improving governance and advocacy. So this is a really important part of the community board function for our community, that we listen, that we go into bat for them where it's appropriate, that we provide good opportunities to enable the community to let us know what they're wanting, and that we represent what they want. That we keep an eye on what's going on with the services. So just some really simple things around, you know, weeds and drains and the level of footpaths and things like that. So we want to be keeping an eye on some of those types of things as well. So on to goal 4. Supporting projects in the community. So this is always a really big one and a really expensive one, but they are really important, as the ladies in Cambridge have pointed out, that we support what's going on in the community. It just improves our pride in where we live. So the Memorial Park for us is a really important component of that, and we will represent the community views and help pass on some of their suggestions. And we feel that it's really important that we get this right, because there's a lot of sentiment riding on the outcomes of that park and what changes in there. Who are we, Te Awamutu? So we've had an initial meeting. We're now putting together some recommendations that will be coming to council before too long. But just as a quick heads up on that, we ended up with 717 participants, and 68% still see roses as significant to our town. But there is also a very strong support for cultural and historical attributes and to be able to promote those. So it's been a really interesting survey, and we also had a really good cross-section from young to old. It's not skewed particularly at all. It's very even across the different age brackets. Females, those got the upper hand. The boys weren't quite so keen to comment. What have I got next? The cycles. So yep. So actually the same as Cambridge here. Promoting those safe cycleways and walkways. So this includes the best place for them to go. We'd like to continue to focus on getting a walkway along from McDonald's down into the George Street car park and into that space and improve that. Also under that umbrella is the Kekapuku, improving the Kekapuku mountain track, because that's in a rather dire state at the moment with lots of muddy, slippery, washed out parts. And also on one of our things on our hit list is safer pedestrian crossings throughout the town, and especially in light of our recent tragedy that we had. Possibly could a raised pedestrian crossing have made a difference? Possibly not, but you know, these are the things we'd like to investigate further. And then we're more than happy to continue to support the community gardens. We're pretty lucky here in Te Awamutu. There's a couple of really great groups of people that are very keen on these. So as a community board, we're not driving it, but we just want to put it out there that we are very supportive and available to help where we can in that space. So goal 5, promoting waste minimisation. So we've got quite a long way on this one. There's not too much left to go, but we will continue with urban miners. It's been a great success story what the Cambridge Rotary have started by setting up the urban miners, and our own Te Awamutu Rotary have gotten behind. So we regularly meet once a month down there, and that's also a great place to just reach out to people and connect with the community. The battery recycling station at Pack and Save is going great guns. I know that there are noises to work with Mitre 10 Mega and do something slightly different, but until such times as that's up and running, Community Board sees that as a key area to continue to be involved in. And hopefully with a bit of luck, now that COVID's mostly behind us, we will be able to have the DIY garage sale on this side of the district as well. And the other key one is supporting what Council's doing and supporting Sally in her work as the Waste Minimisation Officer. So we will definitely be taking part in the submission for waste minimisation and supporting Sally, you know, wherever and whenever we can. So that's pretty much me. So thank you very much. Tēnā rawa atu koutou. But if there are any questions, happy to try and answer those as best I can.
Thank you, Ange. Questions, Mike?
Thank you through the chair. Kia ora, Ange, for that. This is actually a question probably focused more at Kirsty. So these are the goals that we've heard from each of the community boards, which are all outstanding. In terms of what lies in behind it, in terms of action plans, is that the next step? Like I heard a little bit from Cambridge Community Board about what they're looking at doing for, say, rural engagement, though it's not official, but that sort of, you know, action, who's doing it, timeframes, and so, and actually what they want to get out of it.
So through the chair, thank you for that question, Mike. You're correct in that the Cambridge Community Board did sort of speak to that in a summary version, and I think Joe highlighted that they are going to have another workshop session to detail that program of work. And I would expect that Ange is working with the TA Community Board in the same vein. Staff will provide support, so I have responsibility as exec support to work with both community boards, and then working together with Gary Knighton and Brad Ward with those community boards and the governance team. There will also be, I think, discussion around, you know, delegations of authority is something else that has been flagged and to be considered to be reporting back to council. So absolutely detailed programs, plans of work to be prepared, led by the community boards, but supported by staff.
Yeah, right. That's really great to hear, because, you know, then there's every expectation and chance that this will succeed. It'd be really nice to actually have that come back to this group when it's done and dusted, and celebrate that, or at least get an invite, maybe if you do it at the community boards, an invite to actually come along and have a look at that, because I think that's really the catalyst of, you know, rounding it out, and you've actually got something tangible in front of you to really start focusing within a certain time frame, and everyone knows what they're doing. So yeah, well done, and well done to, I guess, this group here of actually instigating this, because it really is 2.0, and this will allow a 3.0 and a 4.0, because we were heading was a 0.0, you know, probably. So it's actually great that the Waipa Council have invested in this and actually believe in these community boards. So
Kirsty would like to respond to that.
Just through the chair, just you'll recall last week that there were decisions made about the establishment of a PCG, and also the oversight committee being this committee. So we'll be working through that process also in terms of how the boards feed into this committee and the work of the PCG. So yeah, great work to date.
Claire.
I did just very quickly want to add, sorry Claire, that through you, Mike, that Lou has invited me to the urban mobility. So community board will start to have a presence on our urban mobility, because I also pricked my ears up that Joe is already on that. So I did try to get on it last year, but got told I needed to wait. So I'm not waiting now, I'm just going. So just thought I'd put that out there. Sorry, Claire.
That's right. That sounds great. Great. Yeah, I totally support Mike's comments about it. It's fantastic to see the community board members reporting to council and hearing about all your initiatives. It's really encouraging, and yeah, wish you all the best. I was going to follow up with you, you know, about that survey you did about the identity of Te Awamutu, and, you know, like, yeah, what logo or yeah, like you said, that there's quite a majority around the Rosetown idea still. Like, what are your next steps with that work?
So we just got together the other day, and Shane's done a great job of making up a little summary. We're just putting together some recommendations that we will then just refine a little bit and then present to community board. And once we get community board support, we will then bring that to council to say this is what the community has come back with and their response to those questions and the things that they have identified as being important. One of the key areas, though, that we want to try and work as closely as possible with local iwi, so that it is reflective of their wants and needs as well, that it's not, you know, that it's about all of us here, not just one-sided.
Oh no, that's great to know that you know you're progressing that, and yeah, it's so important to have that brand that's got the whole community behind it. All and it different.
Yeah, and it really is. I just very quickly remember when we did that previous one, and we had a university student come in, and he made a comment that it can take only approximately 30% of your population, if they don't like something, to be able to derail it. So we're keeping that in the back of our head with our recommendations. Yeah. So.
Okay, Lou.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. I totally agree with Angie's statement with urban mobility. I was the only representative in the last urban mobility meeting from Te Awamutu with 6, I think, or 8. I think it was 8 actually Cambridge members. So I do think that for recognition and you're being aware of the program from its onset. So yeah, so I do support having somebody else there that's on the same page.
Okay, appear to be no further questions. So Joe, you're still here, aren't you? Joe Davies-Collier. Look, I'd just like to thank you both for coming. I think you've heard a real commitment around this council table and from the exec to Community Boards 2.0. It's a really important part of participatory democracy, sort of reigniting the community boards, and it's you're both community boards obviously playing their part in this. So long may it continue. This is our year to sort of really embed 2.0 into the organisation. I think it's going well. I think it's really a great time to show up, tagged on the end of a long-term plan workshop that you're here. So thanks for coming. Keep up the good work, and keep engaging with us and keep engaging with your communities. Thank you. Okay, we're slightly ahead of schedule, but I think everyone's here. Yeah. Moving into the public places bylaw, we've got Graham Pollard and Diana. And Brian's here as well. Right, great. Yeah. Right, we're in your hands.
Nice, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So a workshop on the public places bylaw. You recall that you gave us the green light a month ago to start working on this. So what we want to do, good, it does work, is to highlight the proposed changes that we've got in the bylaws, draft bylaw so far. Diana will explain more of the detail as to how we're proposing to address those. Get your direction as to whether that's good, not good, needs to be changed or whatever, and also an opportunity if you've got any other burning concerns to raise those with us. Okay, just a reminder, first adopt this bylaw. It's a large bylaw. It was 5 years ago that we first adopted that, and we're hoping that we might actually be able to get this review completed for its 5th anniversary. So this is its statutory 5-yearly review under the Local Government Act, but of course there's quite a lot of roading stuff under the Land Transport Act as well. So, so we're seeking your feedback on what we've done. I said it was a large bylaw. It includes quite a lot of things. So signs around in the road corridor and in the community, various activities that we've lumped together under trading activities, looking at various nuisances, parkings, road uses, and some stuff on stock droving as well. This is a rural community, as as we well know. So we attached in the documentation to the presentation a working draft of the bylaw. And you'll have seen that it is, if you're familiar with the current one, you'll have seen that there is a new format. So Diana's been busy trying to get the bylaw knocked into shape so it's consistent with the format of our new bylaws. She's done things like remove a lot of the repetition that I put in 5 years ago. Thanks for that. So an example there of how she's got 5 lines down into 2. So hopefully that makes it all very readable for people as well, and removes any possibilities of, or reduces the ambiguity that creeps in when you have repetition. I have to repeat the click, that's it. Where the current bylaw repeats existing legislation, we've taken that out. There's no need to include that. We've amended 1 or 2 definitions, not a huge number. Definition of events, for example. Mobile trading has an amendment in there as well. And the current Schedules 1 and 2, which are about conditions of permits, we're proposing to move those outside the bylaw so that it gives us greater flexibility. We can add to them, change things without actually having to go through an entire bylaw review process, which, as you appreciate, takes several months. So that's what we are proposing in terms of general changes.
Are you happy to take questions as we go, I'm assuming, Mike?
Yeah, it's just a possible add-on, just that no person may drive any vehicle, cycle, etc. Electric scooter, did we leave it out on purpose, or was it just omitted, or they're increasingly used and they're probably not a lot different to a cycle?
So in the land transport rule, the wheeled recreational devices include those sort of scooters, so that's covered there.
One of the benefits of removing this from our bylaws, those that transport things that then drive the road code that the government can change those. Our bylaws.
Okay, so I'll hand over to Diana to get into some of the nitty-gritty.
Thank you, Graham. So in terms of the substantive changes to the bylaw, we're not, from our review so far, we haven't identified very many that are needed. There's sort of a lot of it's been sort of that removing duplication and not repeating things in other legislation, but we did identify just a few things that we wanted to get your input on about whether that is something good to include or not to include, and get your thoughts. So one issue that did come up is that our current public places bylaw has a general prohibition on all political signs. And so there's a question of, if we allow political signs to an election period, would that encourage more participation in our local and general elections? Some people have thought maybe actually if there is that more presence around our community of election signs, that might encourage more participation. So we have got a sort of question about whether we should allow election signs. So looking at examples from other councils, we have got in the working draft that political signs are allowed 90 days before the election if they're removed basically on the election day as required by election laws, or 5 days after. And also, yeah, that would only be, you have to be a candidate or be a party to the election to actually have an election sign. It's not any political sign. So we just sort of wanted to get feedback of having that option. There's obviously would be resource implications if our staff are now approving the signs, but we thought actually it's better to have that overall council control to make sure that the signs aren't put anywhere inappropriate, say is very near eroding you know, intersection and that type of thing. And so we've got sort of other options like keep the status quo, or
only allow with additional controls which we put in the bylaw itself. Are there any election signs in, say, X, Y, and Z locations and that sort of thing? We haven't explored what those locations would be. We sort of wanted to get feedback about those. So up there are kind of the 4 options we were looking at, and would be interested in feedback about what your thoughts are about that.
Roger.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Good. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, this. I'm actually not sure that whether you allowed signs on public places or not would increase participation in an election. I mean, if you look at our last election, both community board and the ward for Cambridge, we probably, and mayor, we probably had somewhere in the teens, 15, 16 different candidates. And I think only 4 people put up signs or something like that. So I'm not too sure it would. But then what we're seeing currently, particularly in Cambridge, there's a lot of transient signs appearing on the roadside, particularly in that stretch between the White Church and the Queen Street. And I think I drove past there must have been 6 signs. So I think that there is a demand for signs on the roadside, and in the absence of having a dirty great billboard where everybody could put the signs on, I think it actually does serve a good community purpose, allowing signs for that. And certainly, I mean, the urban miners and Trash and Treasure Market always bang their signs, and the Gaslight here always bang their signs. So I'm in favour of allowing. I don't think there's much difference between a political party putting out a sign and, say, Trash and Treasure putting out a sign. It's just community information. So I prefer something of a more liberal approach to signs on roadside verges. But I just wondered, what is Schedule 2?
That is scheduled to the current bylaw, which sort of says things about, it has to be made of sturdy material. It can't look to duplicate traffic signs and sort of, I guess, common sense safety elements. Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, and I think certainly having some condition that it doesn't allow it close to an intersection that could perhaps become a road safety hazard would be a requirement. Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
And we've got Mike and then Lou.
Thank you, through the chair. A couple of comments. Do we, at national elections, how long can signs be up for? Is it 6 weeks or is it 90 days?
I believe it's 90 days.
It is. Right. Yeah, personally, I think 90 days is far too long to have signs up for a council election campaign. That's my personal view. I don't think the general population are interested at all 90 days out. And to be honest, most people sitting around this room probably aren't that active 90 days out either. My next comment is around, and this gets back to that national politics stuff, is you cannot have a campaign sign out 90 days before, but you can have a I am MP for Taupo 365 days a year. So there is a difference there that you could have, any councillor could put up something saying I am the councillor, ward councillor for, and that could sit somewhere permanently, I would think, which I know sits outside this, but there'd be nothing to stop someone doing that.
If it was on private property.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going to throw it in there. I think 90 days is too long. So I'd just like some comments on it.
Have you got a suggestion as to what it could be, Mike?
I think sort of six weeks is sort of ample.
Okay, Lou.
Yeah, thank you. I tend to agree totally with what you just said, Mike. One of the things that worries me is we get proliferation of these signs on public property. 90 days, I think, is far too excessive on the grounds that they'll attract graffiti or things like that during that period. And not only that, as I say, the proliferation of them. How do you limit the amount of signs you've got on this public place. If you give it to one, you're virtually committing to give it to others. The other thing I'd like to just answer with people like Urban Miners, we've actually applied to get those signs and a location, and actually have a written application in with the position that we're allowed to put those signs up. So there is a consent given for them. So I just wanted to correct that. It's not something that's just granted without due diligence.
Susan.
Because somebody probably had the most signs up out of anybody here last election. I actually find that there's no need to use our public places for the purpose of election advertising. I think you drive into the cities and you see them all jockeying for position, and I just think it's pollution. You know, we've got so many spaces in the district that people can find on private property to display their election hoardings. I just think I think public spaces should remain completely. Yeah, I don't think there's any need for it personally. No.
Mike? Yeah.
You don't want to see my mug for 90 days at the roundabout somewhere, trust you me. It's bad enough as it was, right? I just think public place is sacrosanct in that space, for me personally.
Yeah, and just through the chair, and hey, and I do agree with that. The flip side is someone who's standing who hasn't got the context that a lot of people standing or have been around for a while have. You have got an advantage. And that's what I'd say. I mean, I don't particularly want to see them on the corners either, like in Auckland or the rest of it. But if you've been around the traps a while and you know people, you know, you can get the good posies. Whereas a public place is, I guess, equitable and equal, and there's no advantage apart from who bangs it up first to get the best spot. But yeah.
Okay, there have been contrary views expressed here, and I think the team need a clear steer, because for the bylaw that goes out to consultation, that would be a fair assessment, wouldn't it? So I'm not really getting a sense for this.
I think the status quo of staying away from public places is I think what the majority is, but I really would like to test that, say, 6 weeks or 42 days against the 90 or something as opposed to the 90.
But that means if the first gateway step is you're allowing them in public places, the second thing is on what criteria, on what conditions. So the first question here is are we going to take this out with an allowance for public places? You're probably getting the sense, same as you, Mike, that it is the majority here are thinking no. Would there be contrary views? Okay, yep. There's a workshop. We'll call that a good enough steer for you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Which means we don't have to go on to the subsequent decisions because we're not having them in public places. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It was very, very useful. That's great. Thank you. So the next one is, this is just a tidy up, but it's currently we do enable one by one like sandwich board sign outside a place of business. So this is just to highlight that we've put that in because actually that was current practice and it just wasn't quite reflected. So that's that kind of sandwich board sign, which has to comply with the requirements of Schedule 2, which we mentioned earlier about general practicalities of good signs. Moving along.
Excuse me. Yeah, and we're saying one because if you have two, obviously it doubles it. I can do maths. I do remember my primary education. But there's a risk then that you've just got Sign City along the footpaths, and that affects the visibility of for other road users. So we've kept it at one. Just want to make sure that you're still okay with that. I see nods.
Yeah, Lou.
Quick question. I'm involved with the RSA. No, we place ours actually on our own property. And, you know, I'm saying, like, if you have too many of these signs on the pathways, which are, you know, as a council, they can become an impediment to people walking around. So I do think these signs have to be placed in a place, you know, where they're not going to impede pedestrian traffic or traffic on them.
Definitely. So Schedule 2 includes exactly that.
So can I ask a bit of clarification on non-political signs? And given that urban miners do apply for a permit, so that's good. Yep. What about the others? Is there a permit system for each sign display to apply for, or do we just turn a blind eye to signs?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. The bylaw permits certain things, so you can have one of these signs, but as soon as you want one that's bigger or anything different, then you need to apply for a permit. One of the issues we struggle with is sometimes community groups will just come and whack in a whole lot of signs, and they because they don't know the rules, they don't talk to anybody, so we have to chase them up and say, hey, you've put signs in inappropriate places, you've got to remove them, apply for a permit, which comes at no cost, and we just keep track of that, and they can correct it. Other times that the things that we battle is, a business, like it's often the dairies or a takeaway place, they'll have 5 or 6 of these sandwich type board signs out front on the footpath, and they're just cluttering it up. So, it's almost like a maze to get through it. So that's the sort of thing we want to crack down on, and in that case we wouldn't give a permit if somebody wants to do something which is contrary to good practice.
Thank you. Well, the question that we're not going to stop any of these community organisations the opportunity of being able to promote their various events. Yeah, good.
Okay, back to you, Graham.
Okay, so moving along, so the next category that's being regulated is trading activities. So under our current bylaw, we've listed you need a consent for display of goods and services, stalls, markets, alfresco dining, and mobile trading. What we've done is a sort of, I guess, a style change is say you need a consent for a trading activity, and then we've defined what that is. And so what's highlighted in bold is sort of the additional categories, which looking around at other council bylaws, we thought actually, is that something we want to include? So what wasn't covered was general street performance, which is essentially busking, but would cover a wider amount of activities to make sure it captures everything. Also fundraising for a charitable cause. So do we want to include that? So that's when people doing the collections. Also distribution of promotional goods and materials. So basically freebies to add as a type of in a public place. Do we need a permit for that? So that's sort of just been added there just to ensure it's sort of all encompassing, because potentially these could cause a nuisance if unregulated. So sort of putting it out there if there's support for this sort of wider definition.
Marcus.
Does that capture the Jehovah's Witnesses? Advertising the stuff on the side of the road, because you get these stands like people giving you stuff on the side of things. It's like, well, I mean,
I guess that would be promotional goods and materials. So it's promoting not a commercial entity, but it's
Mike.
Yeah, hey, I'm personally opposed to pretty much all those. I think it's becoming nanny state stuff. And I'm thinking of little groups and that just go down. They don't want to be dealing with paperwork. I can't ever see them causing an issue. It would just stifle a whole bunch of stuff here. I think we just keep it simple. Unless there's a big issue out there, and it doesn't sound like there is, I don't want to become resilient in this area.
So to be clear, Mike, what are you objecting to in the list?
At the moment, and I don't think there's no decent why for me.
Can I just follow that up with a query about the on the left-hand side under the current bylaw, you say busking's out but covered elsewhere. What's the status quo for a busker? What do they have to do?
So currently it's you can't busk if you're going to cause a nuisance. That's how it's currently drafted.
But you can busk permit free, and now you're going to require a permit, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had Mike's opinion on that. Anyone in support or against Mike's opinion?
I agree with Mike. So I'm quite comfortable with the way. No, we're trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist.
Okay, Roger?
Yeah, thanks for you, Mr. Chair. I'm just aware, actually, being in Rotary, then we have the Heart Foundation that we man their stalls, and what's the other one? Anyway, there's a couple that we actually have street side stalls, which are for a good social service. And I would not like to see them in any way not enabled through our bylaw, because I think they do a lot of good, you know, the white ribbon appeal and those kind of things.
Okay, I'm getting a sense of general agreement here with Mike's initial proposition. Just could I ask the people who drafted this for any pushback on that? Any reason why they're in here that we don't know, that we need to know about?
To be honest, it was really just trying to it was really following what other councils have done. So it wasn't sort of, there was a strong need identified. So it was really, I guess, putting it out there whether we wanted to be a bit more all-encompassing. So yeah, there's no strong problem identified.
Yeah.
Like I would suggest that possibly there have been issues in other probably more populous councils that required something like this, but I don't see them being required here. So yeah, but all good for being industrious.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's pretty clear steer from council.
No, I'd just like clarification. Are we saying that those highlighted should be removed or included?
Removed.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the situation with things like the Hart Foundation?
So collecting wouldn't be covered. Charitable collections.
Sorry?
Charitable collections you wouldn't need approval from council to do that.
Right. But they can still do it. They just wouldn't need a permit.
Yes.
Anything outside of the bylaw is free to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So the current practice, when they approach the transport department, whether it's the Daffodil Day or other activities, and ask, do we need a permit? We say no, but talk with the business premises where you want to be and make sure that they're comfortable with what you're planning.
Okay, I think we can move on from that.
Can I ask a question?
With the removal of those three or the four highlighted ones, what are we going to do about things like cars, where people put cars in public places or even on the street for sale, and they sit there for weeks sometimes, and they seem to accumulate. You get one, then you get another one, and particularly on parks and things like that. And we do need the regulation somewhere to be able to say to people, well, this is a public place, and you shouldn't have these vehicles sitting here untended for quite lengthy periods. We had one that when I was working at Norwood, so it was across the road from us. It sat on the road, it had its windows broken. Then there's three others sitting there, and one with flat tyres. And I just think there is a place to have some sort of regulation that you can operate with that.
So through the chair, great point. We've actually got that covered in the bylaw under a separate.
Just following that I mean, G is slightly different to the others. Okay, G is offering commercial services in a public place, which is that of a different nature to the other, to E, H, and I that we're objecting to here. Yeah.
What's that? Is that windscreen cleaners?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Got to be careful what we wish for here. This going up for consultation.
It's a different. It does have a different nature for sure. But is there a problem we have with that currently? If there isn't, I don't believe. I'm with Andrew on this one. Clearly, it's an issue in other places, but I don't. To the best of my knowledge, it's not been something that we've encountered as being a challenge here.
I think it's covered somewhere else in the bylaw.
Yes. Yeah. So the offering services while people are in an intersection in their vehicles is specifically covered elsewhere. So.
This is a question related. You recall that when we refurbished and curbed the area between the Alpha Street roundabout and the Queen Street roundabout, on that curbside, which was on the Victoria Square side, we allocated a certain pay of all our trains, which we said that we were going to have some form of reservation system for and permit for. Is that still in place? Because it just looks to me that we're now beginning to see a number of full-time traders that are actually parking outside of that mobile trader ban, and therefore is that becoming a problem or isn't it? But I mean, it is taking away parking, which was the intent, keeping that to a fine area. Would you like to speak on that?
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, there's certainly an area in that space. Well, back it up. So there is permits for all of those people who are operating there. We've issued them permits, and there is a timetable because there's more demand for that area than there is space. So they're limited as to when they can be there. So they're not all there at once. And there's obviously some parallel parking spaces or a bay where some of the bigger, like the Fishman operates from, because he cannot physically be in an angle park, he'd stick out into the traffic. Whereas some of the smaller traders can operate within the angle parking spaces, although we do not reserve spaces for them in those angle parks. So if they're not there and they arrive and people are parked there, they're out of luck. So in that way, we are facilitating it as best we can within the space we have without dominating the space.
But what I'm hearing is that it's not a problem. Good. Okay.
Okay, anything else on trading activities? We've got 8 of these headings to get through, so clear.
I was just going to ask about the designated public places that exclude the mobile traders. I was really looking at Tuamutu. Was that reviewed as part of this process? Because while I don't have an issue with any of them, I thought that in the future, some of the places that aren't prohibited may become quite attractive places for mobile traders. And so, yeah, I don't know whether or not it would be worth to consider whether or not some of those prohibitions should be extended. I was thinking around about the Rose Garden, and that there's a playground there now, and at the moment, only parts of those areas would be prohibited to mobile traders. That's all. And then I don't know whether it's practical, but you've just mentioned, Brian, that if there are parking places there, a trader could actually set up in a parking place. Yeah. So that's all. Yeah.
The prohibition areas were really to just isolate the CBD areas where we didn't want those traders directly competing outside other businesses. So the rest of the district doesn't have a prohibition, but they still have to apply for a permit, and staff still have to consider whether it's a sensible location. So we have had some mobile traders who said, well, we want to be beside that adventure playground. And we've said, well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense to, or we don't want, they wanted to be on the opposite side of the road. We didn't want kids running across the road to an ice cream stall or something like that. So each one on its merits and considering safety and appropriateness.
Yeah, and you can apply some controls to it. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Moving along now, this isn't really a big one, it's more just to note it. Previously, there were quite a few listed specific, I think there are about 20 types of nuisance and obstructions. And really, this is just to highlight that the new draft proposes actually pushing them to just 3 clauses instead. But it should still achieve the same aims, being to really prevent people without council approval obstructing areas or causing damage or leaving any materials and those sorts of things. So this is just highlighting that change.
Does fly tipping come under this?
Yes. Yeah. So they'll be leaving material and so forth. And the next one was about parks. So we had a specific clause in our current public places bylaw which covered parks. And there was some uncertainty about whether it also covered reserves. And so we have made a specific definition of parks to not only include parks, but also reserves. So it's clear that it covers both. And there are certain powers now added, which were there currently, but they would also now cover reserves, the ability to close a park or reserve, for health and safety reasons or otherwise. And previously there was a prohibition which said you can't use vehicles in the park if it's prohibited, but there's no power that says about designating which parts of the park you can use vehicles on. So there's just been an additional power just to, so you can say, well, this is where you cycle, this is where you skate, and things like that. So that's just what's being added in there. And it's subject to the Reserves Act as well. So those powers have to be, if there's restrictions under the Reserves Act, that would take precedence. Again, just minor changes with parking. These are very small. Basically, previously we could designate loading zones for commercial vehicles. We've now just designated loading zones, so it could also be dropping off passengers, for example, outside a new museum. You could drop off people on the way, and that could be a loading zone. Also designating emergency vehicle parks. Previously that was near their premises, but now you might want, for example, an emergency vehicle park designated outside a sports field or somewhere like that. And I guess the major change would be we've specifically stated now that you cannot park on berms. Previously, we just talked about parking on grass edges or verges, and there was some uncertainty about, well, if there was a car parked on a berm, would that be breaking the bylaw or not? So that just clarifies it. I don't know if you wanted to comment more widely on berms at all.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, our past practice has been we would not intervene, or we wouldn't ask the enforcement officer to intervene in any way if there was occasional parking on a grass berm outside a property, and it wasn't doing any damage. But as soon as it was starting to cause a nuisance and a mud bath and things like that, that's when we'd be in and say, look, this is unacceptable, and give them a warning and then a ticket if they carried on.
Claire.
Yeah, thanks. I was interested in the provision that's under parking restrictions 15.1C on page 91 of the present of our agenda, page 15 of your report, I think. I sent it through earlier. Yeah, so you said that it's generally prohibited to park on a berm or a road verge, but it sounds like a heavy motor vehicle could park on an area if there was land in the urban road adjacent to either one side of the road, that they could park on, because they'd be prohibited to park on the road. So they should, it sounds like you should be allowing them to park on the grass, but we're...
Yeah, I had this as a highly ambiguous clause as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Thank you. That's basically a typo. It should be urban area. So basically, it's basically if a heavy vehicle is parked where either side is urban area is defined as a residential zone.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah. So thank you. Yeah. Working draft.
And can I just follow up? Well, Brian, you were talking about generally if there has been parking on grass verges or berms that just been intermittent, nothing's been done, but like out at Pirongia, on the Franklin Street edge of the Four Square, in the wintertime, you get a lot of people drawing up onto that grassed area, and then it gets really muddy. And are you aware of that? And because I was wondering whether or not, some bollards or something should be put there to stop that activity. I don't know.
That becomes a little bit more complicated because it's a state highway, and unless the state highway people have prohibited parking there, we can't take any enforcement action. And the state highway guys have typically never gone further than the seal edge, in terms of road markings and signs.
Roger.
We talked about H vehicles there just a minute ago. What is the general situation for parking of H vehicles within the urban centre?
Mr. Chairman, obviously there's lots of places where heavy goods vehicles do park because there'll be industrial and commercial areas where they must go and they must unload goods and all sorts of things. So our bylaw has been very much around trying to address the nuisance when somebody maybe they make their living by driving a truck, and every day they drive it home and park it in a small, narrow residential street, and they decide, well, the street's so narrow, so now they're driving up on the footpath and parking on the footpath and damaging that. So those are the ones, and we get quite a few complaints about that. It happens quite a bit, that people have a nuisance going on in their neighbourhood. And so our bylaw allows us to give a warning and then a ticket and stop them doing that. But otherwise, we don't tend to have too many problems. I know around the Victoria Square in Cambridge, we put in some parking controls because the drivers who used to be parking in the Lakewood area when it was undeveloped all started parking around the park. And of course, to get there, they would drive over the traffic islands and everything because they couldn't fit around the tight corners. So we put in prohibitions to stop it. So yeah, generally that blanket rule, not in a residential area, but everywhere else, it's typically okay unless we need to restrict it because they're creating a nuisance or damage.
I'm just thinking specifically of the extension now to our urban boundary to actually include Hautapu, which my understanding is that it takes our urban boundary out to Peak Road. So does that mean that all of that area between Peak Road and Vogel Street, Vogel Place, now becomes residential and restrictive of H vehicles?
That's correct. The definition in the bylaw just says an urban residential area. So it covers it. So as soon as it's zoned as
it's going to cause a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because we've got a number of trucks that actually use that as their overnight parking area.
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on to road use restrictions. Again, we made changes, but we've added now a power to designate that places where you cannot do U-turns. We currently have where you can't do left or right turns, so we've added U-turns as well. And also we've retained our antisocial driving clauses, but what we've added is as part of the specific purposes of the bylaw, we've stated that these specific clauses are needed essentially to target antisocial driving behaviour. And by adding that specific purpose, it means that we fit within the definition of qualifying bylaw under the Land Transport Act, which means that the police can use their impounding powers in relation to breaches of those particular clauses. So that just really strengthens the enforcement provisions for breaches of those bylaws. And we've just got a very minor work in progress definition, change on the restrictions on the Victoria Bridge, because we realised that it could be drafted a bit more clearly. So we're working on that to make it.
Well, description prohibits all cars.
Hey, Diana, can I just the purposes you were just alluding to, the two new purposes. I just note that the first one in C, you talk about racing of motor vehicles, and in D, you're talking about cruising. Now, the separate issue with each, but are they defined anywhere? Because cruising to me, actually, if you watch American movies, it has a particular connotation, I'd suggest.
Yes, so those particular exact wording really comes from the Land Transport Act, which also defines cruising as well. So those terms are directly from the Land Transport Act. So we're using the same terms to make sure that we're consistent with that act.
So by by repeating racing, does that mean we're including all boy racer activity? Just by the fact you're replicating the word?
No. So basically what we're saying is the purpose of so we've got this light motor vehicle restriction, which we can close roads from 9 to 4 in the morning for light motor vehicles. And what we're saying, the purpose of doing that is to place restrictions on racing and motor vehicles. So it's just saying why we're doing it as opposed to broadening what we can do.
So you're not giving the boy racers an out by saying we're not racing?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason we're doing that purpose is that fits within the definition of qualifying bylaw.
Questions? Okay, move on.
So, again, nothing much has changed with our stock and vehicle crossings provisions. We're just highlighting that we've moved all the conditions for approvals out of the bylaw itself, so we have that flexibility going forward. And finally, oh, sorry.
Mr. Chair.
Bruce.
Diana, can I just have your views on it's dairy cattle? I mentioned there's dairy cattle, this and that. Now, a lot of underpasses, etc., are used by cattle. Now, could you have a little look at that terminology that maybe it's just cattle?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything's down to dairy cattle or non-dairy. So, yeah, so it could be, that's
I will look into it, definitely. Thank you.
Claire.
I've got another question from an earlier section, I think, which I didn't pick up, because we've got public places where trapping's being done by community groups, and that that could be seen as being dangerous or being a nuisance, to the public. And I just wanted to check that we're not sort of constraining that and making that more difficult. That is there approval needed, for people to undertake that activity? I wouldn't want it to be, so onerous, it's going to discourage that kind of thing. I don't really want to see big fees or anything like that, but I can appreciate that you want to make sure it's being done in a safe way so that members of the public or pets or, other non-target animals, aren't going to be harmed and things.
Yes, so basically under the Reserves Act, there's a whole approval process for, killing animals under the, on reserves. And so that we have a whole process for doing permits and things. And so those particular clauses where they're in the existing bylaw, and they're just a blanket prohibition, and we've now added without council approval, so then we can approve it at certain times. Yeah.
All right, back to you.
So, thank you for time.
Your microphone, Graham, I believe.
Sorry. We're doing well on time, so thank you for this. So our intention, actually, if you're okay with this, is to run our working draft once we've put these amendments in, is to run the working draft past the two community boards, so they've got plenty of time to know what's coming in, so they can, when we come to formal consultation, they've got more time to put submissions together. You'll appreciate with the trading activities, the Chambers of Commerce might have an interest in this as well. So in terms of early engagement, to just run it past them and New Zealand Police as well, because obviously what we're trying to do in terms of the antisocial driving is to help their powers. So we want to make sure that they're comfortable with it. We were required by law to do an assessment against the New Zealand Bill of Rights. So we'll obviously do that assessment before we bring it back for approval for consultation, which we're expecting to be able to do in a couple of months' time. And the consultation run June and July. And hopefully we'll get plenty of comments, because that means that people have read it, they're engaged, they're interested, and they've got views as to how they see the community running in this respect. So hopefully we can get lots of comment. I'm interested to know whether you're okay with those early engagement proposals. So obviously don't want to engage outside of the organisation without your okay.
Yeah, Mike.
I thought about it before, but I'm going to bring it up, and it's just a flag for the future. And I'm just thinking, and it's around the parking on the curbs and up on the booms. And I'm just thinking down the track, I think we're going to get more and more traffic on people saying it's not safe for me to actually leave my car fully on the road. And I think of an example on the corner of Thornton Road and Robinson Street. There's 3 townhouses have just gone in. There's very limited parking. I'm just thinking when friends come over, at the moment, the boom is a mess because construction workers, etc. But you can see places like that where people are going to go, well, it's a dangerous place anyway. And the safest place is up on a boom. That we may have to in future concrete some of those booms somehow just as a consideration, because there are going to be some areas that are just not safe to leave a car out on the road as more of these, intensive housing situations happen. And that's not even really, it's just something to be aware of. It's not the bylaw thing, but I think we just have to be realistic about the future and how we actually deal with this.
Okay. So if that's that, we'll wrap that up. Thanks very much. I think detailed elected member examination of the bylaw is really good, and I thought that was a good level of questioning. So thanks very much. And we are stopping now for lunch back here at 1 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.